Welcome back, Purrfect Peeps, to Purrfect.dev. Today on the show, we have Daniel Roe. Hello, Daniel.
Hello.
Joining us from across the pond. Hopefully it's a little warmer over there than here.
I hope so.
I don't have good news for you on that front, I'm afraid. It's a blustery evening and it's been a blustery day.
Yeah,
it's been a little crazy here too. But it's March. What are we going to do?
Yeah.
Anyways, today with Daniel, we're talking, the title of our talk is Creating a Better Vue with Nuxt. So a little play on words there, but obviously we're talking about Vue.js, but specifically on more of the server side. It's something new to me. So Daniel will probably get a lot of crazy, I don't know why he's asking these questions. So Daniel is actually part of the core team on Nuxt. And there's a difference there, right? Like there's core team community and core team sponsor based or core member. How does that work?
So there's a huge community of people who help out with Nuxt. And in lots of different roles as well. So we think about the contributors as being a pretty wide group of people. We also have ambassadors who are particularly recognized for their work in making Nuxt accessible to the wider world. Within the team of contributors, we have maintainers, people who are responsible for particular parts of the project. So maybe modules that are particularly well used. And then we also have a framework team, who are people who work directly on the Nuxt.js framework core.
Okay.
I'm part of that. And recently, actually, I've started working for Nuxt as well. So
okay, that was going to be my big question was, are you working for Nuxt or are you kind of working on the side and doing this for fun and free?
Well, I'm absolutely doing it for fun. You're right on that one. My previous role was as CTO of a startup, and we use Nuxt as a core part of our infrastructure. We built our app on it, and I loved using it. It was a fantastic time saver and accelerator for us. And I always wanted to give back and help out, which I did alongside that role. And when they came to be part of the team at Nuxt, it was a dream come true.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it sounds like you got to give back in the best way possible and become part of the team. That's amazing.
Yeah, that is
what was that like when you kind of were able to make that transition? Were you just getting better acquainted with the team there, or was it you were submitting so much to the framework they said, well, we should bring him on? How did that look?
So the transition, it's not like it was some kind of cliff edge or a huge adjustment. I guess I was working quite closely with the team anyway. They're friends, sharing a vision, helping out other people. When the opportunity came and I was starting to think about what was next, it dovetailed very nicely into what Nuxt was looking for in that moment in time. So it was.
So Daniel, yeah, that's really great that you were able to kind of join the team and get on to the Nuxt project. But for many people, that are just getting started into front-end web development and development in general, or web development, I should say. When we talk about like Vue.js, can you just kind of set the tone for what we're about to talk about and kind of describe what is Vue.js, what framework that is, and what does it mean to you?
Sure. So the first thing I think of when I think of Vue.js is that it is a declarative JavaScript framework as opposed to an imperative framework. And that may not sound that much clearer. But
yeah, I've heard that often. I always have to Google it and then like remember what that means. Can you break that down a little bit?
Absolutely. So a declarative framework sets out what the relationship is between data and DOM. So how does my information affect what the browser is displaying? So I'll say, well, I want the user's name to go here, and I want when you click this button to change the user's name, and then that's all I have to do. From that point onwards, I've declared that relationship. And whatever happens, if the user's name changes, the HTML will change too. So it's quite a simple way. It can be quite logical. You can think of it basically prioritizing your data. So as you make changes to your data, the DOM reacts, the HTML page changes. And it's very easy to create interactive websites for that reason, because you can just use conditions, and you say, well, if the data is like this, then I just show this button. And if it's like that, then add this class and make it glow, and so on. And so that's the difference. That's what declarative is. Imperative is if you have to write everything out. So I want to go and find the button that has this ID, and then I want to add this class to it, and then I want to add an event listener to this button. And if that happens, then I want to do this. And so it's more verbose, and it's a lot harder. It's a lot more work to write all that extra code.
So the first part sounds very like Angular. I'm used to that. And the second part to me sounds more like native JavaScript. Is that a good way of kind of differentiating?
It's a good way of differentiating it. I mean, the reason these frameworks exist is to abstract a lot of that the boilerplate out. And to add extra optimizations that maybe you wouldn't be able to do on your own. So it's not actually like they add a performance overhead. They just make it simpler and easier to work. And that's not unique to Vue. So the same kind of declarative model that I'm talking about is also true of React, as you say. Angular, I'm less familiar with. It's true of Svelte as well. So it's a great way of thinking and coding, because you're able to represent your logic with your interface. So that works really well.
Is it similar to templating, like in HTML, like you have a template tag? Is that kind of what we're talking about?
It's a superpowered template, because exactly. So it's a template, but a template that stays in sync and only updates the bits of the template that need to, and keeps track of state along the way. So, even when you do update an element in the DOM, like maybe a text input, you don't lose the content of that. It still retains.
What do you use for state management?
So you can manage state within. Vue operates on the concept of components. So you could put everything in one big component, but you might probably break it up into little pieces that represent logical parts of what you're coding. So you could store state within a component if it corresponds to that particular component instance. So, for example, you might have an input, a form input, and it keeps track of its own state. Or you might have a bigger piece of component, which is more like a user profile, and it keeps track of lots of bits of information. You can also have global state. So there's something called Vuex, and there are other ways of storing data globally. So it's often used for things like user interface. So if you have a modal showing that maybe it's not unique to one bit of your app, you want to keep track of it in several places and consume it in several places, and you can store it globally too.
Is Vuex the standard?
Vuex is absolutely, you can use anything. So Vue it doesn't force you to use any one thing, but there is a first class set of Vue core components, like Vue Router, which governs client-side single page app routing. There is Vuex, which is state management, and there are others as well. So it's
very cool.
Yeah, Vuex is the official state management.
So taking like all these nice Vue pieces, and I know developers love Vue. I feel like it's a very popular developer framework. I don't know if it has quite the not backing, but kind of the build up that React and then Angular and those frameworks are a little older have. But I feel like Vue is taking all the good parts of those, and they take from Vue too. Like it's back and forth, but they were starting to kind of take all those good parts and put it into Vue, which I've really enjoyed watching and seeing the growth of it. But then kind of came, Then kind of came this next evolution, right, where we went from like these applications that live solely in the browser, and we're like back to this state of we need server side rendering, and now you have tools like Nuxt and Next, and which they shouldn't have named those so similarly, but like all of those, Angular Universal, those are kind of the next pieces. So how do you take like the need for a Vue application and start to realize, well, I need this in more server side, so I should use Nuxt? Is it one before the other, or do you immediately say for an evergreen type of implementation, you always just go to Nuxt first? Can you kind of break that down?
Sure, and there's lots there to talk about.
Sorry, it's a long question.
No. I think so. One of the interesting moves that you've alluded to is this move from static server-side generated HTML, which is what you traditionally think about. Your old WordPress or your old EJS templating page. You sort of render it up in your Node server, and you send it down the line to your browser. You consume it, and if you submit something, it sends a request to the server, and you get a fresh full page. Or you click a link, and again the same thing happens. And the move from that to client side to this progressive web app concept, where it was much like a rendered application, and you have changes of state in Vue that don't correspond necessarily to just different pages of the site. It's not like a document, it's like an application. And now we're talking about, well, we want to be able to render that application in an interactive way, but we want to just serve full HTML in the first instance. And you're right, that's not just Nuxt, it's other frameworks as well. And by the by, I'll come back to it, but Nuxt doesn't just do server-side rendering. You can write a fully client-side app in Nuxt too. But why would you want to do something that's server-side rendered? For me, I think it's mostly about performance and user experience. So when you have a server-side rendered app, you can do a lot of really clever things. So you can embed all the CSS that's used above the fold, or indeed on the whole page, within your initial response. You can of course fully render it, which means when the browser receives those first few bytes of HTML, it can start rendering them straight away. So it knows where the button is going to be. It knows what color it's going to be. It's all there. What you have is the HTML arrives, it displays on the screen, and then you start to load the JavaScript, which hydrates that HTML, makes it interactive and interesting. But before that point, it's still on the screen. The user can see it and can consume the content. So read it. If there are links, they can click them. They can interact with it. I mean, the whole thing is taking place in milliseconds. So it's not like a lot is going to happen in the gap. But what you do have is this sort of immediate, it's there. There's not a loading spinner. There's not a white screen. The site loaded, as far as you're concerned as a user. That's a phenomenal thing to be able to have for an app. And then basically you have no downside, because at that point you now get the full client-side progressive web app that we're talking about. From that point onwards, it's an app, and there are no more requests to the server other than to load JavaScript bundles. Maybe if they're you split your bundle up to optimize performance, there might be some extra bundles to download, and so that's the only request that's going to happen, not full HTML at that point. Cool. So you get the best of both worlds, and I think that I wouldn't compare it to the server-side apps we used to have that were full HTML on every request.
Yeah.
But it's a bit like a hybrid of the best bits of that world and the best bits of the new JavaScript app.
So there's like two things that immediately come to my mind every time we talk about server SSR, server side generated. When you talk about like Angular Universal in the early days, and somewhat today if you don't do it right, you used to always get this immediate like full page and then a white flash and then that kind of rehydration piece in there. Does Nuxt have any of that, or is it easily unrecognizable? So like the screen comes up, it's got the full payload, and then it does the other bits as it continues.
So Vue is really good at hydrating a page, and it doesn't get it. So nothing changed. So the DOM elements all stay there. They don't go away. There's no white flash. What happens is simply that Vue attaches itself. So event listeners are set up. The browser now knows that when certain things happen, it has Vue handle that for it, and then Vue handles that and changes and takes care of diffing the DOM. So when bits of it need to change, Vue will do that. It won't update everything. It will just update what needs to change. Perfect. And in the new Vue 3 release, that's got even better. So
does that use a virtual DOM similar to React?
So yes, there's a virtual DOM, exactly. So there's a JavaScript object which object array which corresponds to all the different tags on the page. And so yes, you can traverse that virtual DOM, and yes, that matches the real DOM on the page. But it's often a lot faster to make changes to a virtual DOM, so a JavaScript object, and then render it, rather than have to every time you make a change, it has to update the HTML element. So that's a key performance.
Yeah. So the second piece, and I'll continuously keep going back to Nuxt because we've been using it for our site, and I feel like I'll probably, I don't know, run out of analogies at some point. But when we talk about Nuxt, they also include something called NuxtLink in there. So if we have a blog page that comes up and we have our most recent post in that, let's say, if we use the NuxtLink on all of those, it actually says, okay, I'm going to load up that page. We're going to hydrate it, but I'm also going to start preloading all of these other pages so that once I click into those, we don't have to, kind of rewrite this entire screen again. We don't have to go through all this stuff. It just immediately kind of clicks over and renders. Is that the same thing that's happening on the Nuxt side of the house as well?
Yeah, so there's so Vue Router provides a router link component, which Nuxt takes on board and extends and adds some extra features to, and it's called NuxtLink. So yes, it does similar things. So for example, when that link enters the viewport, then it can fetch the JavaScript bundle for the next page, so that when you click it, it is instantaneous. It's a great experience, and you can do that. You can tell individual links not to prefetch the next page, or so on. Lots of features around that. But again, I think that gets at why this sort of JavaScript-based app can be so performant, that you click that link and it's so quick that the next page is ready. I mean, it's mind-boggling. I think I still remember when I first discovered this kind of framework, that it felt effortless. It's just magic how fast it was compared to HTML pages back in the day when you click that link and it goes white.
Yeah, it has to go back to the server, do its thing, bring all that back to the browser, do the whole rendering again. Yeah, it's fantastic.
That kind of goes along with routing a little bit. So how does routing work in Nuxt? Do you have a page-based routing system?
Good question.
So if you're using Vue, just pure Vue, you might probably be using this hash-based routing, which is where you have your website and then a hash, and then your route goes in the fragment after that hash, which works for purely client-side apps because there are no different pages on the server. There's just the one file which is serving everything. Although you can set it up if you have the right server and you can configure it correctly. But Nuxt uses Vue Router as well, but uses the history mode. So we have we have what looks like a full URL, lots of slashes, no hashes, and that's something you've used on a particular page. So it looks. So yes, it's the kind of routing exactly you're looking at, and Nuxt handles that on the client side and on the server side. So if you request the route, a deep route, then that will the right page will come back. Now Nuxt actually does it automatically for you. So when you add pages to your Vue components to your pages directory, they get turned into routes. and automatically bundle split. So basically, Vue will create different Webpack bundles corresponding to those different pages. So if you, and will infer the name of that page from the name of the file. So if you create a pages about.vue file, that's your about page, and index is your home page. And you can have dynamic parameters that correspond to, you know, a user ID or a location name or something like that. And it can get quite complicated. If you do need to take full control of it, you can do that too. Create your own routes or whatever. But basically, when the user then requests a route corresponding to that, Nuxt knows exactly what page will handle it, and will serve just the JavaScript files required to render that page. And then as you navigate from that point onward on the app, the bundles corresponding to the other routes start getting downloaded as needed.
So I think on again, on the Nuxt side of things, they have kind of page-based, but they also do like a permalink, or not permalink, what's the word I'm looking for? It's like a dynamic link reference too. Is Nuxt capable of doing kind of those dynamically routed items as well then?
So yeah. So that dynamic parameter, it's a little bit different from Next, which uses the square brackets. Nuxt uses, and at least Nuxt 2 uses an underscore to indicate a dynamic parameter. So you would have your underscore ID or underscore slug.view, and that is your dynamic dynamic parameter, or just underscore.view is a sort of catch-all that covers everything,
okay.
And will catch every possible version. Slashes, no slashes after that point. So and yes, and then that gets pulled in. I mean, even just for that, Nuxt is quite useful, because if you're trying to set that up on your own with a Vue project, you'll have to manually create the dynamic imports in your router file. You'll have to add the Webpack comment that's going to give it a useful chunk name so you can debug it well. You know, it's a lot of boilerplate that really nobody needs to do.
Yeah.
And so yeah, Nuxt takes care of that.
No thanks for Webpack config. I'm good.
No, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there are new kids on the block. Webpack 5 is incredible. Like, there's some really exciting things about that, and implementing that in Nuxt 3 has been huge fun. Stuff like on-demand compilation or module federation, and it is insanely fast. But there are new kids on the block too. So we're using Vite it's available in Nuxt 2, and it's in Nuxt 3 as well. Have you come across Vite at all?
Only in SvelteKit. So I'm big into Svelte, and I've seen that they switched from using Snowpack to Vite right before they released the beta.
It's a different paradigm, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's so fast, faster than your brain can think about. Like reloading, it's reloaded. It's crazy fast.
It's really cool. That sort of having the browser do the module resolution and decide what it needs to see, and then the server just has to handle that rather than have to do a big build in advance. And that feels really nice.
Yeah.
One thing I forgot to put on our list, but it's kind of been interesting to me. So as I did a little bit of research on the Nuxt side of things, I'm a huge proponent of TypeScript. And I noticed on Nuxt, they have like the main Nuxt.js.org site, but then for TypeScript, it's like, from what I can tell, it's almost a completely different subdomain happening in there. Is that like done on purpose, or because TypeScript came later? Can you talk a little bit about that?
So historically, you're right. That's just the history of it. Nuxt is at the moment written in JavaScript, rather than TypeScript. And TypeScript support is added with a module, which we totally need to talk about, because modules are one of the unique things about Nuxt. So TypeScript support was added with a module. And so the site you're talking about is the site for the TypeScript module, which is a core part of Nuxt, but it is a separate thing that you would install. Nuxt 3 is written in TypeScript, so there's not going to be that sort of divide. And it's worth saying that TypeScript support has been improving in Nuxt itself. So you can now write your Nuxt config file, for example, in TypeScript. No need to install anything extra. There's a Nuxt types package, which is part of the core repo. But you're right, it does seem a little odd to have a subdomain for a TypeScript integration.
It was interesting going through the documentation. I'm like, where is TypeScript? And then like Googling it drives to the subdomain. I'm like, oh, okay. So it was a little odd. That's interesting. And in my case, good to hear that will be part of Nuxt 3.0. Is that?
I mean, exactly. I'm a big fan of TypeScript too. It again, it's a sort of opens your eyes. It helps me so much. Helps me avoid mistakes. The auto completion is incredible to be able to do that and have a little bit of validation of my code, particularly when refactoring. I don't know about you, but to be able to move things around and then have my compiler squawk at me until I fix the bugs I've introduced. So it's great.
I drive Brittney crazy on coding cat with our TypeScript. So
yeah, I'm not as big of a fan, but
it's funny because I feel like there's like this whole TypeScript conversation occurring now with like all these tools that are coming out built on Rust and things like that. And then, Rust is 100 times faster, and then it'll be, but TypeScript's 160 times slower when you're using. So it's like, oh man, like there has to be this happy medium that we can find somewhere. Hopefully the ES modules and all the greatness of ES will kind of take care of that eventually, but one day we'll get there. So you kind of said something that piqued my interest a little bit as far as modules in Nuxt. Can we break that down a little bit? Is that like modules in Angular, or is there an equivalent that I can wrap my brain around that a little bit?
So modules in Nuxt basically exposed everything about Nuxt for customization. So you can think of Nuxt as having several different contexts. So there's your Webpack context or your app context where your code runs, but then there's also the Nuxt context, which is the framework itself. So everything from what happens when I type Nuxt.dev, so the command line, through to customizing what the Webpack config is, or how compilation happens, or how the files are served. Everything from server to command line to creating the config to the template itself for what the Webpack app is going to even look like. So that Nuxt context is where modules operate. So they can inject things into your app. So they can add functionality by using a templating language to actually add files or modify the files that you've created in some programmatic way. But they can also interact with existing components in the Nuxt system. So the fact, for example, that you could add full TypeScript support to Nuxt by writing a module is phenomenal. It shows off some of the functionality of the ecosystem. When we wanted to add a Vite support, we wrote a module rather than changing Nuxt itself. Other amazing modules have been written to do everything from integrate with Google Fonts to add sitemap support or robots.text generation, or stuff to change or optimize your images, or even integrate with image providers. We have a new module about to come out, not yet released, called Nuxt Image, which does some amazing stuff. Not just with providers that already exist, but even ships its own self-hosted provider that anyone can use for their own site, that enables incredible dynamic image generation to match the needs of your app.
Oh, that's interesting.
Really cool. But so yes, there's a huge module ecosystem. There's a website that has some of them called modules.nuxt.js.org, and you can browse through and see some of the things. But basically, everything about Nuxt is exposed to these module authors, which means you can build some amazing things.
It sounds almost like a plugin, like Gatsby uses the plugins. Is it similar to that?
That's why I was
So that would be a good word to describe it. I mean, in Nuxt, we also have another concept of plugin, which means we wouldn't use that word in the Nuxt world, but it's a perfectly good description of what's going on exactly.
Okay.
That's really interesting. It's cool that they have like a full site for modules specifically, because I feel like at one time Next.js had kind of its own plugin repo and everything else beside it, and then they kind of merge that back into the core, and I feel like it's really lost steam. And for things that you're describing specifically, like we're just looking at kind of creating our sitemap dynamically and things like that, and it'd be like, man, I wish there was just a module for this. But something that I'm running into is that would also be very difficult in my mind too, because if you have like dynamic static sites that you're creating, and then you have server-side rendered stuff that you don't want in there. Like there's so many iterations for like a module to hit in Nuxt to go through that. That seems like it'd be quite difficult to create a module that would allow that to I don't know, exist, I guess, and be written well enough to take care of your entire sitemap like a WordPress does or something like that.
So yeah, there are challenges.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious. Again, just from what we know on the SSG and things like that, when you host a Nuxt app, is there the capability to do some of the nice regeneration things for the static sites and SSR? What does a common app or a larger app look like for that?
So yeah, so in terms of obviously there's this static site generation that you're talking about, which Nuxt does. So you can you can create your app, and then you can render it fully as HTML. So server rendered at build time effectively, and that can then go up anywhere on any static host, S3, wherever, and be served. Nuxt also has a sort of server mode, so you can run it as a node server. So anywhere that would run, you can have a live server that handles incoming requests, and obviously with server cache and stuff like that.
I noticed there was kind of during the CLI, there's a question that says server or static, and it threw me off because I'm like, well, I want both. So is that a story that Nuxt can still handle? Like some pages are server side, but some are static?
So yes, that is something Nuxt can do. So currently, the Versal builder, for example, does that. Yep. So we have a Versal runtime where you can pre-generate some of your pages, but serve the others or anything dynamic from the actual Lambda function, the serverless function, and people can implement that pattern themselves. But that's a little bit tied to the hosting provider. So you have to have a server that can handle that. But yes, that's possible. We've actually, so I mean that's possible right now with Nuxt 2 as is, but with Nuxt 3. So Nuxt 3 is the next major version of Nuxt, which was originally started just to support Vue 3, but basically in building this and going back to the drawing board and bringing some new innovations in, we've actually ended up making quite a lot of significant changes to creating new modules and new functionality that we're now backporting and bringing back to Nuxt 2, even before Nuxt 3 is out. And in particular, in answer to your question, we have this new server rendering framework called Nitro, which completely supports this hybrid mode of some pages being statically generated, some being dynamic, some pages being statically generated, but still accessing dynamic data that's being returned to them by sort of dynamic API routes. So there's lots of very, very exciting things coming with that. And it runs on Cloudflare workers and Dino and all sorts of places that you might not normally be able to run a traditional node server.
That's exciting. Yeah, with Dino 1.0 or version 1, I think coming out, that's pretty awesome. All those different stories that you can tell. I'm going to pause here. We might have to continue, but let's do our Purrfect Picks now in case Brittney has to go. And then if there's more, we can kind of loop back around. Cool. So at this time of our podcast, we always love to do something fun called Purrfect Picks. And Daniel, you were kind enough to put your Purrfect Picks into the actual outline already. So I am going to bring those up now. The first one you have should be on our screen now.
So Windi CSS is it's quite a new project, and it's really exciting. So they're pioneering some features that. So you probably need to know what Tailwind CSS is. So Tailwind CSS is a fantastic framework for. I think of it primarily as setting a consistent CSS configuration and then enabling you to access that configuration with class names that are standardized. Windi CSS has a different approach at compiling those class names. So it does it on demand. So there's never any extra CSS compiled. It has some new syntax, which is pretty cool. But the main thing that you'll love about it is the speed. But the maintainers are doing all kinds of clever things. They just added right to left support. You can code in your dev tools. So you can actually just open up your inspector and start typing class names, and your page will magically look as it should. And you can do that with just adding a script from a CDN in the head of your page. It's really amazing. You can.
That's cool. I actually just found out about this when Tailwind came out with their JIT, the just-in-time compiler. So is Tailwind kind of taking care of this package, or is this still different?
There's a little bit of Twitter beef kind of going between the two authors right now. So
I think that is I don't know anything about the backstory, but I think it's great when there are different packages on the scene. Like that helps everybody innovate, doesn't it?
Yep.
It does, yes.
And so I'm sure Windi will make Tailwind better, and obviously Windi wouldn't be what it is without Tailwind. So I think there's lots of space for cross-pollination and helping each other. But definitely check out Windi CSS. It's cool.
Yeah, we love Tailwind. We use on Coding Cat, so we'll definitely keep an eye on this. Your second pick. So
I think so this is How Not to Burnout. It's a blog article I read that I thought was really quite insightful, particularly targeted at software developers. And I mean, this is something that's true all the time. I think it is the danger of burnout, because we tend to be focused on perfection, getting things right all the time to a very high standard, and that's maybe even more true when we are working from home. When there aren't clear boundaries between home life and work life, and what when to stop, and have I done enough, and is what I'm doing good enough? Read the article. It's really helpful. Even if you think, well, look, I'm in no danger of burnout, and nothing in my life am I uncomfortable about? I think it would still give you some helpful questions. And maybe some little there's some, I think at one point there are 10 signs of 10 stages of burnout. Might be quite helpful just to know what those are, and think, if I spot some of this happening, 12 maybe, if I spot some of this happening in my life, maybe that's a sign to change something or consider some options. And there are some suggestions as well in the article for things that we particularly as software developers can do to help. So have a read. It's something that
I have to tell you, if you made it through coronavirus and have not hit burnout, you were amazing. So.
Absolutely.
Your third pick, Daily.dev. Tell me about it.
So it's Daily.dev I just came across it the other day. It's a collection of high quality developer blogs. So they're curated, and there's lots of interesting things there. Have a read. It's a good way of discovering new content. I think there's a danger that if you follow the same people on Twitter, maybe you see the same content all the time. But people are coming up with new things, and new devs are jumping in and contributing. And this is maybe a good way of discovering some of the new stuff out there.
I love that. I know I like nice curated items. Cool. Brittney, you are up next.
All right. My first one, I went out kind of exploring and research for this podcast for how we could get started with Nuxt, and I found a Learn with Jason on it. So go check that out. It's just a great way to get up and running with a Nuxt app. I almost said next.
I'm telling you, the name.
It's like it's so close. It's so hard.
Don't say node next and Nuxt all at the same time.
Nuxt, next, nest. Is that the other one? Nest.
Yeah, Nest is one too.
It's too many.
I love Maya's Cloudinary unicorn. I see this picture all the time. It makes me smile.
That is
Sorry.
cute.
Anyways, your second pick.
And my second pick is GSAP, or maybe better known as GreenSock. It's a JavaScript animation library that I've been working with lately. And it's really simple to just, you drop in the CDN, you import it into your JavaScript file, and then throw a class on something. And then you can start like modifying like how you want things to come in with just regular CSS. It's kind of really powerful how you can just add these animations in so easily.
Wow. Very cool.
Yeah.
It's a nice framework. Or probably not a framework. I keep misusing that.
I don't know. That's a touchy subject. Library.
My first pick is actually called Uniform.dev. By the time this podcast comes out, there was another podcast we did with Tim Bennix, and he's actually a developer advocate at Uniform. And the more I've kind of dug into what they're doing, and especially in the Jamstack world, it's really cool. Hoping to get them on for like a full demo, but just know like they're taking all the parts and pieces that are all over the place with Jamstack and kind of putting the glue back together. One of the products that they have I find pretty fascinating, so I'm hoping to kind of get a full tutorial on it. So I think they're still working to release this like more broadly, but you can actually take like an existing site and it will start to map that out for you. So I found that pretty cool. The second one is called Stitches, who we are going to have this person on to talk about Stitches very soon, but I thought I'd do it as a perfect pick just to jazz things up as we go. So CSS and JS is becoming more and more of a subject, if you ask me. People are really tired of the kind of global top level CSS that cascades and messes everything up, and there's a lot of cool tooling that is coming out around for this. So check it out. We'll put it in the blog. Well, thank you so much, Daniel. I really appreciate you coming onto the podcast and joining us and telling us all about Nuxt.js. And I hope we can have you on again soon. We'll dive into Nuxt 3. See how much again.
Absolutely. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks,